I want to welcome everyone to the Planning and Development Committee. It's Monday, April 23rd. It's 8:08, and we're ready to begin. We do have a quorum, and the first item on the agenda is approval of the regular meeting minutes of April 9th, 2018. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Any corrections or changes? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, we've got a number of people who are signed up.
What did we do?
No one signed up for P1. Is there anyone else who wanted to speak tonight who's not on here? Okay, then I'm going to close citizen comment. First item is P1. It's granting vacation rental license for 1500 Main Street. City staff recommends approval of a vacation rental license for the property located at 1500 Main Street. It meets all the standards and procedures for license approval. It's on for action. Is there a motion?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those approve, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? All right, there are two people signed up for P2. That's the vacation rental license for 1419 Elmwood. Gaylord Amirzian and Roger Brown are here. Do you, both of you, like to come up and speak?
And they're the applicants.
And there's, oh, okay, fine. And there are, do you just want to answer questions, or was there something you want to say? Okay. Well, it's nice to see you. Thank you for coming. Well, then, let's move approval, and is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So this is vacation rental license for the property at 1419 Elmwood, and we'll open it up for discussion. Alderman Wilson, did you?
I've spoken to the applicants. It seems to make sense, and I haven't heard any issues or concerns from the neighbors. So,
Okay.
Good.
Any comments? All right, all those, unless you want to say something, I mean, you're more than welcome to.
Not
Okay.
really. We're doing it so that we can stay in Evanston, and we are at home when our guests arrive, and we stay home with them the whole time.
Excellent.
thank you.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you.
I have someone signed up to speak, Herb Harms. I don't know what you're speaking on, so.
The other paper.
On historic preservation, or, I'm sorry, it's,
The Harvey Clark Mansion.
oh, okay, that's not on our agenda tonight.
Well, it was on one of those papers. She didn't get it.
It's not on any agenda tonight.
You can speak at council. Yeah.
Yeah,
of
you can
course,
speak at citizen comment at council, but it's not on our P&D agenda for tonight.
Okay, well, anyway, I want to speak about the Harvey Clark Mansion.
Okay, that will become, you can do that at citizen comment at council. Okay, and then P3 is ordinance 29018, amending the city code Title II, Chapter 8, Historic Preservation. That's for introduction tonight. Betty Esther is signed up to speak. Betty, would you like to?
Good evening. I read the material that was in the package and kind of was confusing. I understand some of the changes that you did make, but is this, it talked about how, or about making a district or historical site or something that is not architectural in nature. So really wasn't quite clear on how that was going to be fitted in with the regular code you have and the state or regulation about historical sites and things, which usually is architectural. And if you do happen to grant a section of the community historical because of maybe one of the building in there or whatever the nature will be that you're setting to be able to do this. How will this affect those properties that are within there when the people get ready to do something to their homes? Are they going to be held to the preservation standard? Do they have to come and talk to you? It's not clear, and it need to be kind of spelled out. How is this really? It didn't spell out how is it a historical district, for what purpose in category if it's not architectural. It didn't give enough information for one to know, well, if I happen to live in this district, what would it do to my property? What would I have to be doing? What am I going to be facing? So I think before this is passed, it need to be really spelled out, and so that one would know these facts and everything, and maybe the Preservation Committee could do a presentation on this so that we, the public, can understand what is happening. Are you moving away from saying the architectural in the community? We want to have both architectural and historical. Is that what you're saying or not? I think it needs to be clarified.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Esther. Staff, do you want to comment on that? Ms. Williams, you're currently chair of preservation. Are you still chair? Do you want to address, just comment on that?
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Diane Williams. I'm the chair of the Preservation Commission. In terms of the criteria for landmark designation, whether it be individual or a district, there's been very little change to what the criteria are. Most of the language that was changed in the new ordinance was really points of clarification as much as anything else. In terms of the processes, again, they have not changed. It's the same rules ostensibly that the commission has been operating under for the last 25 years at this point. So
the buildings are designated for not only their architectural significance, but for their historical significance.
Historical, yeah.
Some are, I don't know whether we've got any archaeological sites in Evanston, but that's another category.
yeah, but there are provisions for that. But in terms of how those criteria are actually described in the ordinance, there's very little change. But archaeological, architectural, historical, and there's also provisions, as there are in most ordinances, for the potential for association with a particular place or with people, or with a particular story specific to Evanston.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the committee? Did we move approval on this? Okay.
Second.
Okay. So all of those in favor of introduction, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. P4 is ordinance 47018, amending the definition of coach house in the City Code, Section 618.3. Staff recommends adoption of ordinance 47018 to modify the definition of a coach house. A previous version of the proposed text amendment did not receive a recommendation from the Plan Commission, and it was held on April 9th until tonight for introduction. Is there a motion to introduce? Is there?
Second.
Okay. So I'm going to open that up for discussion. No discussion. Okay. Okay. All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, moving right along. P5 is ordinance 40018, amending the city code, permitted obstructions in required yards, general provisions relating to front porches. Following input from the current and former Zoning Board of Appeals Chair, staff recommends direction from the committee regarding the scope of amendments to the front porch regulations. If the proposed amendments are limited to sections of the zoning ordinance that were included in the Plan Commission legal notice, Ordinance 40018 can be approved and/or amended. However, if the committee desires to amend other regulations, such as the appropriate determining body for porch variations, a Plan Commission meeting would need to be renoticed accordingly. This item was held on April 9th until tonight for introduction. Is there a motion to introduce? Okay, nobody wants to introduce, so. Does anyone want to second this? All right. Now we can have a little discussion about it. So it sounds like a very little discussion. Alderman Sufferton.
What's the problem we're trying to solve, and where is it a problem? If anybody can tell me, I'd love it.
Mr. Rogers, do you want to come up and enlighten us all?
Good evening, Matt Rogers. I'm the former zoning board chair. The issue came up that the Plan Commission looked at changing the requirements for front yard porches and setbacks required. We felt that the current chair of the ZBA and I both felt that those were not in the best interest of Evanston by allowing front porches to encroach too quickly into front yards. And
Help me understand when you say quickly. You mean in terms of the individual construction of a house? Quickly in terms of like blocks will have?
Blocks slowly start moving forward.
Okay.
And so all of a sudden where you used to have maybe 20 foot was the average setback, in 20 years suddenly you're at 15 feet or something like that. And so we had spoken, basically we had come to this board about a month ago, a little over a month ago I guess, and expressed our concerns about that. We were asked to submit a memorandum by Alderman Nguyen, who was chair at that time. So we've submitted that, and we're just following up on that discussion.
What neighborhoods or what areas of the city is this? I mean, are there examples of blocks that you could tell me where this has happened, and you could see an example of what you don't want to go on throughout the city? Or is this all speculative?
No, it's not all speculative. I can't give you an exact neighborhood block. It's things that in 10 years of being on the zoning board, I have seen these cases come through where all of a sudden houses are slowly, the front yard setbacks are slowly being eaten up by front porches.
Okay. I mean, this is an example that you gave where it's like you put in baseboard heat and you put up windows and now your porch is...
Your enclosed porch suddenly becomes livable space, and then the next owner decides they want to have a front porch. And so they're putting a front porch in front of what was a front porch. Or they decide that they want to add a second story on top of what was a front porch but is now considered habitable space, and suddenly you're bringing the mass forward on the street as well.
Okay. Understood. So I guess I still don't understand where this is a problem, or you're just saying it's just a general problem in how we do things compared to neighboring communities?
It's a problem in how we do things in comparison to other communities around us.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
And there are certain neighborhoods that this would never impact. There are other neighborhoods where it would impact. Some of the larger homes, obviously, along Sheridan, where some of the setbacks are very great, would never really be impacted by this in the same way that you have houses that were built much closer to the property line to start with. So if you only have a 16-foot setback, which is less than the standard setback that is permitted in Evanston, all of a sudden things start moving forward more quickly.
Got it. Okay. And the reason we don't want things moving forward is?
The idea that we want to have green space along the street, and we don't want the homes to encroach upon the sidewalk and the street.
Okay. Got it. All right.
Matt, I had a question. I was blithely unaware that we had anything less than a 27-foot front yard setback.
Yes.
And so So I was a little bit surprised to read that, in fact, we are moving already into that side yard. I mean, just based historically on neighbors that I know who have, at some point, let's say in the 1950s or 60s, their front porch was removed and they wanted to add it back, and they actually found the original piers for the front porch. They had to meet that 27-foot setback. And that plus, and tell me if I'm wrong here, when you put a roof on something, that becomes, it's a different category?
That is not the way Evanston's ordinance currently is written. The roof or not does not matter.
Okay.
It's whether it is livable space or an enclosed front porch or an open front porch. Any of those definitions would be the same. In terms of something that was historical that somebody would want to bring back, obviously there is still a variation process that people can go through. And in the time that I served on ZBA, we would have people come and say, here is a picture of my house from the 1920s or the 1940s.
Right.
This is the historical porch that was on it. We would like to return to that. And that makes a very strong argument in favor of granting said variance. Because it is restoring the home to its natural state. What we were looking at trying to prevent is this encroachment of people adding porches in front of porches, and it just slowly starts to move forward.
Right. And I think that's important. And it's actually helpful for us to hear what your experience has been as a board. So I would recommend adoption of this. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I do think the front yard setbacks are a real important part of what sort of creates the entire streetscape of Evanston. And green space is obviously really important. Alderman Nguyen, did you?
Well, Alderman Fisk, I agree with you on this, and I do think, given the fact that Evanston traditionally has fairly small lot sizes, it's very important to maintain as much green space as we have. And, you know, it reminds me of the fact that except in a few neighborhoods, we don't permit front yard fences. And part of that was to have everyone be able to enjoy each other's green space because it's limited. So I think this is this makes sense to me. I think it's helpful, and that we should, I would think that we should adopt it as a guideline. You know, I think it's better to get this on the books than early rather than late.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, well, just really quick.
Alderman
I guess the balance that we have to strike is between the passersby's right to enjoy green space.
No.
No, the homeowner.
No, there is a balance. I know where you're going on this.
That's what I'm trying to get at. If I'm living in a house and it's
Right.
like, oh man, this is a little bit tight, but I love Evanston. I've been paying taxes. My kids are in school. I'd love to get a little bit more finished space, right? Which you'd have to go to ZBA and they would make a decision
Correct.
on the merits individually. I guess I'm on the side of that person more than like, hey man, like I really like walking down the sidewalk and having a 27-foot setback. I'm offended.
But it's not necessarily just the people walking down the sidewalk. Remember, it's your neighbors. It's the whole. It's the block itself. And so we're not saying that anybody can come. You could come and propose building your front porch right up to the sidewalk if you so chose.
Right.
I am pretty confident ZBA would not grant that variation. But if a homeowner can come and show that there is a burden or as opposed to an inconvenience for them needing that front porch the way they've designed it, they can make that case to ZBA, and ZBA can make that determination on the individual merits of the case.
Got it. I mean, when you talk about speeding forward, right, the porch in front of the porch, right, you're talking about most likely 2 turnovers of a house. Like the same owner wouldn't.
Usually it's not the same owner, it's the next owner.
So, okay. So, and you're being stewards of like the block over a longer time frame.
As ZBA, that was one of our charges, was to ensure that zoning permitted the enjoyment of the entire community on properties without impacting greatly the homeowners.
Okay. All right. This is my final question, and I appreciate the indulgence. Does this make somebody say, you know what, I'm out of Evanston, I'm moving to Skokie, Glenview, Wilmette, they're much more accommodating for things like this. Is this, what's your guess?
My personal feeling is no.
Okay.
Because we have a different housing stock than some of those communities. And again, people can always make the case for why they want to have a porch. The one thing that has changed over the years, and the one thing that we've always sort of looked at, is front porches were always, one of the ideas behind front porches was to get eyes on the street, to get people engaging with their community. So I'm sitting out on the front porch having a drink and watching what's going on in the street. So that deters any criminal activity. It helps with keeping track of what's going on in my neighborhood, encouraging people to talk to each other. The thing that we've seen over the years is that front porches are no longer serving that same purpose. People have moved to the backs of their houses. People have huge decks now. So if your choice is between sitting on a 5 or 6 foot front porch or sitting on a 20-foot deck, most people are moving to the back of their house where they can barbecue, where they can watch the kids play. So it's a change that has occurred over time. So while we feel front porches are important, they're no longer serving the purpose that they at one time did.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Alderman Nguyen and then Alderman Wilson.
Well, I just wanted to make the point that this isn't necessarily for people walking by. It's so that it's for everyone who lives on the block. And the point about not having front yard fences is so that because we all have fairly small front yards, my front yard feels bigger because I don't have a fence on either side property on my property lines, and so it just gives a greater sense of green space. So that when my kids were playing out in the front yard, they could run into my neighbor's front yard. It was much more of a shared green space. So that's why I think it's important. And it isn't about the look. It's actually about how the homeowners enjoy it. And I do think that, as I said, establishing these guidelines now means that we're really creating what the space is that everyone can know that they can move into, and it'll stay that way because that's our zoning ordinance. So if I move into a particular neighborhood that doesn't allow a commercial building being next door to me, I'm counting on that. So that's what I think is important here.
We're not talking about that. I'm sorry.
No, but my point is that's what zoning is all about, a social compact between residences. It's like there's a sense of like, all right, I know what you can build on your property and you know what I can build on my property, and we both purchased our properties knowing that. So and that this is going to be the general outline of my neighborhood. So when we have exception and exception and exception, then the social compact of I'm buying or living in the neighborhood that I know is zoned R2 or I know is zoned R3, that loses its meaning when we have exceptions and variances. So once we have a guideline like this, or make a change and say this is going to be how front porches are done, we are going to maintain a setback from the street, then people can count on that and rely on that.
Alderman Wilson, then Alderman Bruce Simmons.
Thank you. All right, I think you inadvertently now talked me out of it. So, but I like the idea, and I appreciate and enjoy the idea of people being out in the yards and being engaged in what's going on around them. When this was first kind of floated, I felt like, well, you know what, I feel like this is pushing people out of the front yards and into the backyards, and I think just participating in the conversation here and listening, I feel like that's really one of the unintended consequences that is likely to result from this. I'm also concerned that it's not going to be, it's going to have a greater impact in certain neighborhoods in the city. So, on Sheridan Road, it's not going to have any impact, but other neighborhoods, it's going to have a pretty significant limitation on what people can do. And 6 foot porch is, that's not so big. I mean, if you want to hang out, that's not much space. So, we've done a lot over a number of years to do things like placemaking, outdoor dining, things to bring people into the community outside and participating. And So I've now become uncomfortable with this suggestion, so I don't feel like I can support it.
So if I could just respond to that real quickly. So the original proposal limited porches to 6 feet and sort of granted that everybody, with very rare exception, would get a 6-foot front porch. We actually extended that to a 7-foot front porch for homes that could accommodate a larger front yard. And that number was created by staff, coming up with the idea that that was what would be needed for people to have a small table and chairs around that table on their front porch. And so a number of the homes that have been granted our front porch variations recently have gotten a 6-foot front porch. And on most homes in the city of Evanston, we're granting somewhere in the 5 to 6 foot range, which is what is kind of standard for most of the communities around us. And so that's why we came up with our numbers as opposed to the numbers that were presented by Plan Commission.
I get the point about the porch in front of the porch, but I don't perceive that as being a really big problem. I think I perceive the idea that going forward, new housing, things of that nature, are going to be too negatively impacted. So,
Alderman Rusinitz.
Does our setback not protect us from having the front of the house expand too far to the sidewalk?
Currently, and I don't see any, maybe Mr. Mangum can actually answer this for us. I don't believe we currently have a minimum setback in the front yards under our current ordinance, do we?
I thought 27 feet was...
No. I'm sorry. In terms of being able to encroach into the front yard, because we're proposing that it always be 10 feet, always be allowed there. So nobody could build 8 feet from their front property line. And I don't believe we currently have that in our zoning ordinance. So that was something that was into the mix as well.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, Alderman. To back up a little bit, so we do have a front yard setback that's required for all properties. Generally, it's 27 feet, but depending on where other properties on the block are located, it could be less based on that average. So right now, our zoning ordinance allows a projection of up to 10% of that required setback. That's for items like roofs and eaves and chimneys and bay windows, things like that could project. We see that porches need a greater dimension than a chimney or a bay window or a roof eave would be. So that's where the idea came to extend that projection that would be allowed from 10% to something greater, so that 6 feet or 25% into that required setback.
So if, let's just say on a block of 10 houses, if various houses ask for new porches and it's pushed out and then suddenly there's an empty lot with new construction on it, you would look at an average of the setbacks of the houses on the block. So a new house may not have a 27-foot setback. It may be based on the average of the houses that have had these additions on it.
That's correct. We base on the average, however, we'd measure that average to the front of the house, not the front of the porch.
Okay.
As proposed, yes, it would still be that way as proposed by staff and the Plan Commission. So what we're seeing is, like 6 to 10 a year of variance requests. Typically, we do not have issues from the neighbors. They're noticed within a 200-foot radius. Generally, these front porches are not controversial items. So that's where we felt some additional flexibility in the rules to be able to project further than that 10% currently. So on your typical 27-foot setback, to be able to project more than 2.7 feet without going through the variation process. So that was kind of the genesis of the request here.
Well, I just see that over time this can really change the character of a neighborhood. I mean, suddenly instead of the setbacks where things are, you've got different styles of houses, but they're setbacks, so the green space is, as Alderman Nguyen was saying, was something that was enjoyed by all. Suddenly this sort of disappears, and I'm concerned about that. Is that the concern that you guys are having at ZBA?
So yes, that is our concern, and that's why we felt that going with a 25% allowed for most properties in the city of Evanston to build a usable front porch without encroaching too much into the front yard so that you would have that green space barrier still along the front of the properties.
So on the Kendall site, where we have 18 new single-family houses, especially on the Colfax side, there are front porches, and those front porches are within the 27-foot setback, I believe. But they're 5 or 6 foot porches.
But the house, the front of the house is what determines that 27 feet.
Okay, all right.
So the porch is not included into that unless that porch is converted from an enclosed porch into livable space.
All right,
And then
okay.
that moves it forward.
Okay.
But otherwise, the front of the house is what's used to average, not the porches.
Right, okay. Anybody else? Alderman Rose Simmons?
I would need to see more information. Just thinking about my own neighborhood, it seems as though we have very small yards, and I would need more information to make sure that we aren't limiting too much certain neighborhoods, more so than others.
Could we keep this at committee? And maybe we can get like a typical drawing, or maybe there's a typical block that we
I
could.
actually have some.
Well, next time, could
Yeah.
we do that so that
Yeah.
we can project them?
Yeah.
I think that might be helpful. Okay, great. Thank you all very much. And if you come up with specific questions about this, would you?
Sorry to interrupt, Interim City Attorney. I think it's already been held once, so you
Oh.
can't hold it a second time. The other option is you can table it.
Okay, why don't we table it?
Second.
Okay. Do we have to table to a date certain? Okay. Well, let's see what we can do for the next meeting if you need more time. Scott, if you need more time, let us know. Pardon me? Okay. All those in favor of tabling, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, that was fun. Okay, we're going to P6, Ordinance 58018, granting a special use for a Type 2 restaurant, Falcon Eddie's Barbecue at 825 Church Street. Zoning Board of Appeals and city staff recommend adoption, granting a special use. This is in the D2 zoning district. Applicant has complied with all zoning requirements and meets all of the standards of a special use for this district. It's on our agenda for introduction. Mr. Pomerantz is here tonight, and he did speak with staff last week, and unfortunately, it reached out to me for some reason. I didn't get the communication. Asking that this be on for suspension of the rules, so introduction and approval tonight. So as much as I don't like to do that, I'm going to suggest we do that, and it's all done before I finish talking. Okay, so there's a motion to introduce, approve, and suspend the rules. Everybody okay? All right, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, so that's done. Are there any items for discussion? Any communications? All right, so we're going to adjourn. City Council will begin in 10 minutes, which is at 8:50 p.m. Thank you all.